The US election. Is Russia's meddling mischief making or part of a bigger plan? And why is this important to you, your business, and your future security? Hi, it's Roger Hamilton here with another episode of Entrepreneur TV. This one is all about how the biggest secrets are hidden in plain sight and what is Russia's plan with the West. My goal in this video is to show you Russia's long-term plan and how to make sure that you are prepared for the future that's coming. Watch through to the end, and I'll give you the exact steps that you should be taking right now to counter what I'm about to share. This week, the New York Times published this article, Russia continues interfering in election to try to help Trump, US intelligence says. And last month, BBC published this article, almost certain Russians sought to interfere in 2015 UK election. And while political parties keep pointing fingers and arguing about who's colluding with who, the bigger question is, why is Russia doing this in the first place? The answer actually is hidden in plain sight in this book here, Foundations of Geopolitics, written by political theorist Alexander Dugin. Dugin is known as Putin's Rasputin and Putin's brain. He's been called the most dangerous philosopher in the world. And his book, Foundations of Geopolitics, which he wrote in 1997, has been described by Foreign Policy magazine as one of the most curious, impressive, and terrifying books to come out of Russia. It's known as Putin's playbook, and it predicts every one of his major moves he's made in the last 20 years. If we in the West had taken the book seriously, we could have predicted and potentially prevented every one of Putin's moves. And in this video, you're going to see exactly what his next moves are going to be. So here's Dugin's and Putin's master plan in a nutshell. In his book, Dugin divides the world into the land powers, which is Eurasia, and the sea powers, which is the Atlantices. The Atlantices are made up of the US and the UK, and Eurasia is made up of Europe and the old Soviet Union. This is literally the same Eurasia that George Orwell wrote about in 1984. In his book, Dugin lays out the game plan of how Eurasia can dominate over the Atlantices with the 3Ds: deception, destabilization, and disinformation. There's 5 steps in the plan, and like I said earlier, Dugin wrote this book in 1997. Putin came into power in 1999, and every one of these 5 steps either has happened or is in the process of happening now. Step 1 is to invade Georgia, which then gives Russia access to the Black Sea. Step 2 is to annex Crimea and then control Ukraine, giving it better access to Europe. Step 3 is to separate Great Britain from Europe. Step 4 is to sow division and chaos into the US and the UK, and to do this with the 3Ds. And step 5 is to create Eurasia with 3 axes between Moscow, Berlin, Tokyo, and Tehran. This is a 40-year plan, with the end result being what you see on this map. USA and the UK divided and in turmoil and isolated from its traditional Atlantic allies. Turkey and China divided and in turmoil, with Moscow as the center of Eurasia, and allies with Germany, Iran, India, and Japan, giving Eurasia sea access north, south, east, and west. And this 40-year timeline is now linked to Putin's reign. This July, he won a landslide vote, which extends his reign all the way to 2036. That's 40 years after Dugin's book. And to put that in perspective, that is 10 US election cycles. So this puts us just over halfway on a 40-year plan, where at the moment, he is ahead of schedule. Okay, so at this point, you're likely to be thinking, wait, there is a 40-year plan that was written 23 years ago. It's got specific steps and even maps that show us exactly what Putin's going to do at every step of the way. And he's doing it. Why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And that's a pretty fair question to ask. And at the end of this video, I'll give you my reason as to why this is. But first, here's the unbelievable story of just how much progress he's made on this world domination to-do list. Step 1, invading Georgia. This happened in 2008. As you can see in this map, Putin's focus was on Russia getting access to the Black Sea. The result of the Georgia conflict was that Russia ended up declaring both South Ossetia and also Abkhazia, which has got a coastline with the Black Sea, to be independent states. Even until today, 12 years later, Georgia still disputes that these are independent and says that they're simply militarily occupied by Russia. The West actually agrees with this, but that isn't stopping Russia from getting exactly what it wanted. Step 2 is annexing Crimea, and this happened in 2014. You can see from these maps not just how strategically important Ukraine's position is, but also how Crimea gives Russia direct access to the Black Sea. And the way that Russia took over Crimea was straight out of Dugin's playbook, with deception and disinformation. Here's a 2014 BBC article at the time when the invasion started, where it reported little green men. They had no Russian markings. They denied they were from Russia, and even Putin in the article was denying that they were Russian. And here's a 2015 BBC article, which was after a year from that first article and when the invasion was complete. And this is when Putin finally admitted and said, yep, actually, they were Russian all along. This time, the world didn't just not recognize Crimea as being part of Russia, they actually booted Russia out of the G7. And again, that has not stopped Russia from getting exactly what it wanted. Today, Russia's main navy base is in Crimea, and the conflict with Ukraine has been going on for the last decade, with Russia looking to take over without a war. From this month, for Ukraine, endless Putin means endless hybrid war. Russian officials have recently stated that they hope to distribute up to 1 million passports in eastern Ukraine by the end of 2020. This will transform the occupied zone into a passport protectorate. Effectively, it's Russia saying that we're going to take over Ukraine by stealth. So how about step number 3? This is to separate Britain from Europe, which would have been unheard of back in the year 2000. But it's now close to completion, with Britain voting to leave the EU in 2016, and it's actually happened as of January this year. This step Dugin calls the strategy of the anaconda. He says to induce the anaconda to release its grip on the coastline of Eurasia, it must be attacked relentlessly on its home territory, within its own hemisphere, and throughout Eurasia. All levels of geopolitical pressure must be activated simultaneously. Now, as I'm sure you've known, there's been plenty of media stories about Russian interference in the Brexit referendum and the UK elections. Here's a story from just this month. Report to show Russia tried to interfere in Scottish and Brexit referendums. I mean, this is now, 4 years after the referendum? And that report, which finally came out 2 weeks ago, was even more shocking than anyone expected. Staggering Russia report reveals why government battered off Brexit interference claims. And this is quoted from the report. There was ample publicly available evidence of Russian attempts to use disinformation, fake news, and social media bots to amplify the message of pro-Scottish independent voices during the independence referendum in 2014. The report showed lots of evidence of how Russia had been interfering in both the Scottish elections and also Brexit. So why wasn't the UK government even investigating? Because the government was about to go into its own elections and was more interested in short-term gain than any long-term loss. In fact, Boris Johnson had got the report 9 months earlier, but had decided to hide it from the public in order to win the elections, and has just brought it out right now. PM accused of cover-up over a report on Russian meddling in UK politics. So while Putin is playing the long game, which is a 40-year game, we have the West, which is not just the UK, but the US and other Western governments that have no choice but to play a 4-year election cycle, which is like playing a game of chess where one side is a bunch of different people who only ever get to make 4 moves and are trying to beat everyone else and win the game with those 4, unless they happen to win another 4. Whereas on the other side, you have a grandmaster who's able to play all the way from the beginning through to checkmate. The result, step 3 is pretty much done. The UK left the European Union formally on the 1st of January 2020 and has to complete the transition by December 31st of this year. And again, Dugin and Putin's playbook is playing out as planned. So how is step 4 going? This is now coming up to the US elections. Step 4 is destabilizing the US through creating chaos inside the 3 Ds: deception, destabilization, and disinformation. This step will be done when eventually the US gets isolated from the rest of the world. I think we're already about 60 to 70% of the way there. Maybe you think more or less. I'd love to hear your comments down below. But here's the fact so far. After a 3-year investigation in April this year, a Senate panel confirmed Russia's interference in the last elections, and new reports are already out about how they're already interfering in the upcoming elections. But the plan goes far beyond just election meddling. In 1997, Dugin wrote, "There is a need for the Russian special services and their allies to provoke all forms of instability and separatism within the borders of the United States. It is especially important to introduce geopolitical disorder into internal American activity, encouraging all kinds of separatism and ethnic, social, and racial conflicts." And now here in 2020, the New York Times reports Russia trying to stoke US racial tensions before elections. Russia's lead intelligence agency has apparently gone beyond 2016 methods of interference when operatives tried to stoke racial animosity by creating fake Black Lives Matter groups and spreading disinformation to depress Black voter turnout. Now, Russia is also trying to influence white supremacist groups. Russia's primary aim is to foster a sense of crisis in the United States. Dugin from 1997, the Eurasian project proposes Eurasian expansion into South and Central America with the goal of freeing them from the control of the North. As a result of such unrelenting destabilization efforts, the United States and its close ally Britain eventually will be forced to leave the shores of Eurasia, the entire gigantic edifice of Atlanticism will collapse. 23 years later, from 2020, the Washington Post reports Russian actions threaten the United States and its allies, interfering in Western democratic elections, propping up brutal regimes, engaging in cyber attacks on America and its allies, violating important arms treaties. So how do we know when stage 4 is actually complete? Well, according to Dugin, America would not need to be isolated from the rest of the world because America, as a result of the chaos, will decide to isolate itself. From last August, US withdraws from Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. From last month, the US formally announced its withdrawal from the World Health Organization. From this week, US withdraws from the Open Skies Treaty. And if you need more convincing, watch this video, which I did on the collapse of the US dollar and its timing, according to billionaire Ray Dalio. In fact, dollar supremacy is a key part of this because it links all of this from politics to economics. In fact, Russia just hit a major tipping point with the US dollar. As you can see in this article, Russia ditches the dollar for bulk of its exports to China. There's a graph here which actually shows you that over 50% of all of the exports now with China are paid via euros, not dollars. And in fact, with this graph, you can see with all of Europe, about the same is about to happen. So this leads us with step 5, which is underway now. In 2011, Russia created the Eurasian Economic Union, which brings together all of those different countries that have been identified as being part of Eurasia. And here's the stats of the Economic Union you may have never heard of. With 183 million people, it's actually got more people than the European Union. And with 20 million square kilometers, it's double the size of the US and is 4 times the size of Europe. From this article, the other European Union, why the Eurasian Economic Union is a threat on the rise. While it's an economic union for now, Putin's explicit aim has always been to converge political and social fields, enlarging the union to include all post-Soviet states. And this now links to the grand strategy of the 3 axes. The Moscow-Berlin axis, which gives access to the west, the Moscow-Tokyo axis, which gives access to the east, and the Moscow-Tehran axis, which gives access to the south. And while US is tearing up its trade agreements, here's an article: Iran commences Eurasian Economic Union free trade with Russia and Kazakhstan. And as you can see from the map here, they are now doing treaties with over half the world's population. Of the 3 axes, the most important is the north-south, which is Moscow and Tehran. From 1997, Dugin says the idea of a continental Russian Islamic alliance lies at the foundation of anti-Atlanticist strategy. From 2020, Moscow boasts ties with Tehran as US-Iran tensions escalate. Iran began escalating attacks on the US and its allies in summer 2019 by attacking oil tankers in the Gulf, shooting down a US drone, and launching a missile attack against Saudi Aramco. Iran has nearly tripled its stockpile of enriched uranium. And Putin's part in all of this? They're the ones that supplied all the resources to make it happen. Russia agreed to construct Iran's nuclear reactor plant, sold Iran the S-300 missile defense system, and signed a reported $10 billion military deal, including helicopters, planes, and artillery systems. Again, this is a 20-year plan in the making. Back to Dugin. In relation to the South, the geopolitical axis of history, Russia has only one imperative: geopolitical expansion to the shores of the Indian Ocean. Having received geopolitical access in the first place, naval bases on the Iranian shores, Eurasia will enjoy full security from the strategy of the Anaconda Ring. Okay, so you get the idea. This is not some crazy conspiracy theory. This is a documented plan which is playing out in real time. So the 3 big questions I'm going to answer now. What comes next? Why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And what can you do about it? So first, what comes next? Expect the chaos in the US is going to keep on growing and that the government will self-isolate even further. And unless the US does something about it, it will lose its dominance as the leading country in the world, while Russia denies at every step it had anything to do with it. In the meantime, Russia will keep on building its partnerships, and you'll see Eurasia continue to grow in strength. We're going to see conflicts in Ukraine, in Turkey, and Iran continue to grow to the verge of war. And unless there's some dramatic action by some of the governments around the world, then this 40-year plan will be achieved. Which leads to the second question: why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And the reality is, for Western democracies, it's extremely difficult because everyone's focused at a short-term 4-year cycle instead of a 40-year master plan, which means that they're always going to end up with a disadvantage. The long game will always beat the short game. And the other countries which are playing the long game are too busy executing on their own plans. Take China, for example, where Chairman Xi has done even better than Putin. This year, he extended his reign all the way to 2048. And by the way, his plan is even more public and more frightening than the Russia plan. And if you're interested to know what that plan is, then I'll be doing a video next on the China master plan, so please do subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And I'm sure after that video, you need no more convincing that the long game always is going to trump the short game. So finally, what can you do about it? First of all, stay informed. Separate conspiracies and fake news from the real facts. Second, inform others. Like this video, post a comment, give YouTube a reason to share this video with others as well, so they also can be informed. And third, know you have a power to make a difference. Start a group or join a community of like-minded people because there is strength in numbers. Here I am talking about politics, but this is an entrepreneur channel. And the reason we're talking about this is because entrepreneurs are not hobbled by a 4-year election cycle. We are able to play the long game. In fact, it's entrepreneurs which are ahead of governments right now in the space race, in artificial intelligence, in all of the cutting edge technologies. We're not trapped by politics or popularity votes. And all the videos I'm going to be posting through this crisis are about how you play the long game. Because right now, the plans of others which have been hiding in plain sight are clearer to us than ever. And that's not because they've become more visible. It's just because we've slowed down enough to notice them. So put your own 40-year plan together and remember Leonardo da Vinci's quote, everything is connected to everything else. You just need the eyes to see. I hope you found this video useful. If you have, please give it a like, add it to your playlist, and leave a comment for me down below. As always, I'll be reading all of the comments and replying where I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week, where I'll be sharing all about Chairman Xi's China plan.